afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Neo Zhong, year-end student in Global Business Studies, your Master of Ceremony for today. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this public lecture today, entitled The Downfall of Bo Xilai and the Political and Social Implications for Modern China by Mr. Jamil Anderlini, Beijing Bureau Chief of the Financial Times. May I now invite our College Master, Professor Sir James Belize, to have a few words with us, please.
Welcome. As you perhaps know, Morningside College has a series of distinguished visitors, which means that at least twice a year we have a special lecture by the then current distinguished visitor. And this year we're, of course, thinking of them as also being some contribution to help celebrate the 50th anniversary of the university. But today we have Jamil Anderlini, who is head of the Financial Times news desk in Beijing, and has an interesting background. He's a New Zealander. He did English literature for his first degree in New Zealand, Wellington. And then I know he fitted a variety of other things into his life, which don't seem to have fitted him particularly well to discuss the consequences of Bo Xilai's downfall. But it did. One of the things he did was to spend time in the northeast of China, not all that far from Dalian, where Bo Xilai spent some time, but he found it too cold. So he went to Colorado to teach snowboarding. I'm going to leave him with a lot to explain, you understand. Well, of course, he ran away from that, and I know that he ended up by sailing along the Panama Canal, which certainly makes a difference and must have been warm enough. Of course, now he is in Beijing and has been there for 7 years, is it? Oh, 13, right. And has been writing many articles about Chinese affairs in the Financial Times, many of which I have read and found very informative. So we were very happy when he agreed to come and spend a week with us. And his subject today is one that, of course, everybody here is very interested in. So are a lot of people, quite rightly, fascinating business. So I look forward to it very much. You're very welcome.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you very much for that very polite introduction, very kind introduction. I think that you didn't dwell on it, but I do think I'm qualified to talk about this topic because, first of all, I've been a journalist for more than a decade in China, mostly writing about finance, business, economics, but also a big focus on politics. And from the beginning of last year, I really have, until pretty much the trial, which just ended very recently, a month or so ago, I devoted most of my working time to talking about Bo Xilai, researching Bo Xilai and writing about Bo Xilai. And I ended up writing an ebook, a short book, published only on, you can only read it on your e-reader. And it was all about Bo Xilai. In fact, it was called The Bo Xilai Scandal, Power, Death, and Politics in China, which you can see up on the screen. That's the title of the ebook that I wrote. So today I'm going to talk about how Bo Xilai and his downfall and the trial and the case against him, how they really have impacted modern China and how significant this is for the political and social development of modern China.
For the purposes of this lecture, I'm going to assume that most of you have a very good working knowledge of the case of Bo Xilai. The fact that I'll run over it very briefly, but at the end of the talk, I'm going to give you a visual illustration of, I'm going to go through some pictures which sort of tell the story, but I'll do that at the end, because I'm assuming that most of you know the story. In a nutshell, Bo Xilai was one of the Politburo members, the 25 most important people in China. His wife murdered a British citizen, British businessman in November 2011. Then the chief of police of Chongqing, where he was in charge as the Communist Party secretary, the chief of police ran away to the US consulate in Chengdu. Soon after that, a few weeks, a month later, Bo Xilai was arrested. So was his wife, so was the police chief. Well, the police chief was already arrested before that. And Bo Xilai's wife, Bo Xilai, went on trial. She was the first one to go on trial. Then Wang Lijun, the police chief, went on trial last year, and Bo Xilai just went on trial. So if you didn't know that, maybe it's not, the rest of this might be a little bit confusing. But I'll come back to it at the end, and then it should all come together. I'm assuming that pretty much everyone here knows this. So I believe, and pretty much everyone I talk to who looks at Chinese politics believes, that this trial, the trial of Bo Xilai, was the most significant show trial in China since the trial of Madame Mao, Jiang Qing, the wife of Mao Zedong, and the Gang of Four. She was one of the Gang of Four in 1980-81. That was played out on CCTV. They played it on television. It wasn't live. Some people think it was live, but my understanding is it was pre-recorded and then snippets were shown on CCTV. But already that was quite an important historic moment in China. We haven't seen a trial like that in China since 1980, and obviously many, many things have happened between then and now. But my argument is that this trial of Bo Xilai was in many ways no different from the trial of Madame Mao, the Gang of Four. Although this one was played out on Weibo in real time through social media. But in its essence, it was no different, I would argue, than the trial of Madame Mao. And I'm going to leave time for questions afterwards. You can question me on that if you like, but that's my argument. I would say that the whole case, but particularly the trial itself and how it was played out, shows the fragility of the compact at the top of the Chinese leadership. The way that they had to give him a life sentence, the way that they had to play out the trial in this way through social media, the way that they had to really demolish his reputation, I think shows just how much there is battles going on behind the scenes at the top. And I think what this case did, for the first time ever, we saw these internecine warfare, these backroom struggles that happen in the back halls of Zhongnanhai, the smoky, dark halls of Zhongnanhai. For the first time, these broke out into the open. And really what the Bo Xilai case told us was that many people had tried to say and had argued in the recent years, many people had argued that the Communist Party has been able to institutionalize power, that it's been able to institutionalize this progression where you go from one generation to the next, that had been able to install term limits and circumscribe the power of the top people. But I think what Bo Xilai's case told us was that that's not true. That when it comes time for one generation of leaders to step down and hand on to the next generation of leaders, really that's when the battles begin, and that's when China's top leaders spend most of their time backstabbing each other and trying to take each other out. And I think if Bo Xilai had not been taken down in this case, we would have seen him probably elevated to the very top. And that was an extremely dangerous and scary prospect for many of the people within the top communist leaders. for those people at the very top, I would also argue that Bo Xilai, if he had not been taken down, we would have seen a very different leadership lineup come out onto the stage in last November. For the top leadership, a person like Bo Xilai is very, very scary and very, very dangerous. If you look at his background, he was Hong Er Dai. He was what we call a princeling, a red second generation. The Hong Er Dai means the red second generation. He, if you look back in history, was probably far more powerful than Xi Jinping. Because if you think about it, they both have a very similar background. Xi Jinping is the son of Xi Zhongxun, very powerful top leader from Mao's time and again in the 80s. And Bo Xilai is the son of Bo Yibo, a very, very powerful leader, also purged, both of them purged. But, you know, that Bo Xilai went and Xi Jinping both went to the same school, number 4 middle school in Beijing, which some of you know about. Maybe some of you even went there. Very important school in Beijing. It's where the children of the top elite go. They both went there, except something very interesting happened in 1962. Xi Jinping was taken out of number 4 middle school because his father was purged in 1962. And he was probably only about 10 years old at that time. And he went instead to, I think it was number 101. So you can see what a fall happened in the Xi family and happened in his life. Bo Xilai carried on until 1966 at that high school, and even later until the school basically closed down. And then he was thrown into prison. And so later on, when both of their fathers were rehabilitated, Bo Xilai's father was much more powerful than Xi Jinping's father. When you look at the way that the Communist Party has so-called institutionalized power and institutionalized these unwritten rules, there really are unwritten rules. The idea of 5-year and 10-year term limits is written nowhere in the Constitution. It's not written anywhere in the Communist Party Constitution. It really is an unwritten rule. And the great fear that everyone had was that Bo Xilai, if he was to get to the top, he would decide, hey, my dad is much cooler and much more important than your dad. I'm the one who gets to set the rules. And by the way, I don't believe in these term limits at all. I'm going to rule till I feel like it. Many, many people within the system have told me directly that they thought that Bo Xilai could have upended all of the rules, could have changed the way that politics is played out. So this hard work that Deng Xiaoping and other leaders that they did to try and contain power and circumscribe power, could have been washed away. Now, there's another very interesting little unwritten rule that some of you may be aware of. Has anyone heard of the 67 up, 68 down rule? This rule is brought in the late 90s, and it says that at the time of the party congress, if in that year you are 67 years old, you can be promoted into the standing committee of the Politburo. But if you happen to be 68, too bad, sorry, see you later, time to retire. Now, that's a very interesting and somewhat arbitrary rule when you think about it. It's not written down anywhere, so it's just an unwritten rule. But it's very interesting when you think about why 67, 68. The official retirement age is 60 for male cadres, and if you're a very important cadre, it's 65. But where does the 67, 68 rule come from? Basically, and some of you in the room will be very familiar with it, basically it was introduced by Jiang Zemin to get rid of one of his rivals in the late 90s. Basically, he decided, he went around the other people and he worked out everyone's age and he said, okay, we're all 67, but that guy is 68. Let's make a new club and say if you're 67, you go up, and 68, you go down. Totally arbitrary when you think about it, but now has become something of a tradition. Now, many people argue if Bo Xilai had made it to the standing committee of the Politburo, the Chichong way, then he would have almost certainly tried to do away with many of these rules. Getting on to the trial itself, it was the whole trial, everything about it was fraught with political significance. There were two really important goals that I think were served by this trial. The first one was the consolidation of power by the leadership itself. So the new leadership, Xi Jinping. In this system, you accumulate power by displaying power. you get everyone to respect you and think you're a tough leader by being really tough. And Xi Jinping has talked about, since he came in, one of his main central themes has been the idea of the anti-corruption campaign, and the idea that it's not just flies that the Communist Party has to go after; they also have to go after some tigers. But I met with a very interesting princeling himself. This is a guy who went to the same school, number 4 school. I'm not going to tell you his name because it was off the record. We met in a secret cafe in a back alleyway somewhere, and we sat there and drank coffee and had a beer, and then he told me a few things. He went to school with Bo Xilai. His father was a senior military official in the Chinese military, and he said something very, very interesting. He said, Xi Jinping and his administration are very worried at the moment, this is just before the trial, because the economy is slowing down and everyone is criticizing them. Bo Xilai is a dead tiger, so why are they putting him on trial now? It's not a tiger that they caught or hunted down, it's a tiger that their predecessors caught. And he said the reason is they need to display the tiger skin on the wall to boost support from the masses. I thought that was a really nice way of putting it, that Bo Xilai is a dead tiger, but they need to put the tiger skin on the wall to boost their own legitimacy. Now, the second reason that this was the second political goal that was being served by this trial was maintenance of the Communist Party's hold on power. The idea was to hold a open, such as it is, trial that showed how China has been able to institute the rule of law, how the Chinese system is able to carry out trial using, an open trial using laws and procedures that show just how institutionalized power is. Now, my argument, because I went to cover this trial, and I can tell you the Communist Party concept of an open trial is somewhat different from my concept of an open trial. I'll show you a couple of pictures because I think this illustrates a lot. So this is outside the trial. These are petitioners at the top, people nothing to do with Bo Xilai. They were just people hanging around outside the courtyard. When they saw a foreign journalist, they're like, woohoo, I can get my story in the Financial Times. And they all ran over, and they all have literally dozens and dozens of people all grabbing you and throwing bits of paper at you. And there's things like, some people are angry because their relatives were murdered, or some people are angry because they lost a case, a very small case in the court. But all of these people, nothing to do with Bo Xilai, they came running over. So right there, I think, was a sign of how the legal system is not necessarily working exactly how it should be. And this on the bottom right, I'm not in this picture, but that is a group of leftists who were outside who are Maoists, leftists, who are outside the court, who were yelling in support of Bo Xilai. Now, this is how close we got to the open trial of Bo Xilai. So I turned up night before with 250 other foreign journalists, 250 foreign journalists from all, mostly all from China, but these are media from all over the world. We all turned up. We're supposed to all stay in one hotel. We all had to go and we had to get our journalist passes, that big giant thing you see hanging around my neck. And what that journalist pass allowed us to do is stand in that little pen that you see up the top, all together in a little gang, which was, you can see the barricade. So across the road from the entrance, like on the other side, all the media stuck there. So, I don't even know why they bothered with the passes. It's kind of astonishing. Now, this is how open it was. This was on the bottom right-hand corner. This was the first press conference they held on the first day of the trial at about 2 p.m. in the afternoon. And those are all the journalists running over because on the screen, the Weibo account from the court, we're in another part of town at a press conference, but this is the Weibo account from the court had put up a picture and this was being sent to a screen. So these journalists didn't realize they could just go look on their laptops and take the same picture. They saw it and they're like, ooh. Everyone ran over to take a picture of a screen, and that was as open as the trial got. I would argue that that this second goal of the government and the party to show how institutionalized the legal system is and show how open and transparent the system is, I think it pretty much backfired on them. Because if you look around, if you did a vox pop, if you did an opinion poll around China, of course you wouldn't be allowed to, but We did many, many polls. We talked to many, many people. We talked to many experts. And the resounding response we heard, and the resounding response on Weibo, which is the closest we can get to opinion polls, was that this was a show trial, that this was not due process of law, that the judge in that courtroom was not deciding whether or not Bo Xilai was guilty. He was not deciding what the sentence should be. That everything in this trial was decided by Xi Jinping and the other members of the Qi Tengwei long before the poor foreign journalists came and stood in their little pen outside the court. So I think that this goal that they were hoping to achieve pretty much backfired in this case. I think that if you looked at the predictions before the trial, everyone was predicting how many years is Bo Xilai going to get. We had a little sweepstakes running in our office, a little gamble on how many years he was going to get. Most people said 15 years because if you looked at the charges that he was up against, and you looked at the way it was playing out, most people thought 15 years. I was saying 20, so I was closer than most people. But I wasn't right. So it was, in the end, it was a life sentence. He's been given a full life sentence. If he has good behavior and if he is, can argue that he's got poor health, he could be out within 13 years. Maybe in real extenuating circumstances, he could be out in about 9 years. But pretty much certainly everyone believes and everyone assumes that he's not getting out before Xi Jinping steps down. And now, why is that? Why did they have to stage manage things so carefully? Why did they have to make sure that Bo Xilai went down for the entire time that Xi Jinping is going to be in power? Now, my argument is that the thing that the Communist Party leadership and the Communist Party is most afraid of is not a revolution. You hear people talk about revolution, or you hear people talk about an uprising, an Arab Spring. My take on this, and I think the judgment of the top leaders, is not that a revolution is very dangerous, but it's that an internal schism, a moment when top leaders disagree on a very crucial issue, and you have a breaking up of the factions into serious factions. That is what I think they're most afraid of. If you think back to the last time when we saw this very, very obvious schism, a very obvious break at the very top of the party, it was probably 1989. And if you think back to what happened in 1989, you had large protests on the streets, you had people very angry, but they started off very small protests. They started off kind of memorializing Hu Yaobang. But it quickly gathered pace and it quickly spiraled out of control until the government had to use extreme measures to bring it under control. Now, why did it get out of control? I think if something similar was to happen today, for example, so if you look at that on the bottom right-hand corner, those are people supporting Bo Xilai. Those are the kind of people potentially who in 1989 might have been like, yeah, Hu Yaobang. There was only a few thousand people at the very beginning, right? But why I think it's impossible right now in China for that sort of thing to turn into something like 1989. And why is that? Because the Communist Party has learned from its mistakes. It has a very strong control over the military. It's created something called the Wujing, the paramilitary. And these are very, very powerfully, tightly under the control of the Communist Party. And they will listen to the Communist Party. But what happens if you have a situation like in 1989, where you have Zhao Ziyang saying, no, let them do their protests, and then you have Li Peng saying, no, we got to arrest them and smash them and get rid of them. What happens then? The army and the paramilitary know they have to listen to the party, but who's the party? Which part of the party? Whose party? Which party? So this is, I think, what is so significant about the case of Bo Xilai. I think that what people at the very top identified is a person who could potentially be the guy who split the party into different factions and who could potentially, if a crisis came along, could paralyze the party. Because the army wouldn't know, should we listen to the guy whose dad was even more important than the president's dad? Or, should we listen to the guy who looks better in a suit? Or the guy with a better haircut who talks better in front of TV, or, I'm talking about Bo Xilai, right? Obviously. Or should we listen to Xi Jinping, because he's the general secretary? But, Zhao Ziyang was the general secretary. And in the end, they didn't listen to him, right? So they listened to the one with the more powerful political pedigree and backing. Deng Xiaoping was obviously the one with far more presence within the party, with far more legitimacy within the party. So this is what I think is so significant about the trial. One of the most important things about the trial and about the whole case and the way it happened. One thing I found very interesting covering the trial while I was there in the outside. In fact, actually, I have to admit, it's a little bit of an admission that let's call it off the record. What I did is, after going and standing outside the courtroom there for a while, what I did, and when I realized that actually most of the most significant and important information was going to be coming out through Weibo, I went back to the Hilton Hotel and sat in my room for 2 days and just read Weibo and read the transcripts of the trial, because that was where we were getting all of our information, and all of the most important stuff was coming straight from there. So what I found really interesting while I was watching the trial, reading the transcripts, was I felt very, very sorry for the prosecutor. Did anyone follow the Weibo account and as it was coming out real time in Chinese? So it was a fascinating thing. You saw this thing coming out, but I felt really, really sorry for the prosecutor. He would get up and say, Bo Xilai, you are accused of such and such and such and such. Bo Xilai would get up and just start attacking him and really running rings around him. And the prosecutor was in, I think, a very difficult position. The senior leadership and the party and the Zhongjiwei, the discipline inspection anti-corruption body, had decided to charge him on crimes equaling to about $23 million US. When most people, in my experience, most people who saw that in China, they laughed. They said, $23 million? This guy deserves a medal for the cleanest government official at the senior leadership of anyone. What they decided is they have to show that this guy is dirty, that this guy is corrupt. They have to take him down. And they have to have enough charges that he can be put away for life. But if you say that this guy has hundreds of millions of dollars, then the average Lao Baixing might start to think, wait a minute, how did he get hundreds of millions of dollars as a senior leader in the government? And wait, maybe, what about that guy? Or that guy? He's also Hong Ar Dai, and he's also similar family background, and where's his money come from, right? So what they had to do is they had to keep it very, very contained. They had to keep the entire procedure and all of the charges very, very carefully in this little area that they decided they were going to go after him. And so you saw the poor prosecutor, when Bo Xilai was arguing back, the prosecutor, I'm sure, had much more information at his fingertips, but if he was to start to say, oh, yes, but there was also oh, wait a minute, that affects the senior leader over there. Okay, we can't talk about that. And he couldn't argue. He couldn't argue the proper case, although he, I'm sure, had much more evidence. There was no way he could put that evidence into the public. Bo Xilai, on his side, I thought he was quite aware of this, and it was quite funny, some of the things he did. At one point, I remember when you're reading it, it's astonishing. The prosecutor is saying, you had $500,000 and you put it in your safe in this address at this house and you put it here. Bo Xilai is like, $500,000? That's nothing. One safe? We had 8 safes in my house. My wife had $40 million. Why would I care about $500,000? Why would I care about such little amount of money? And what he was doing was, pointing out that it's ludicrous to be accusing him of these tiny little things. A villa in France, you think he's got one villa in France? What about my 10 in Monaco, So I thought it was an amazing bit of political theater, and it was amazing how it played out almost real time through Weibo. But as I said before, my argument is that it did more to erode party legitimacy than it did, at the grassroots in particular, than it did to boost it. And especially if you go back to in the aftermath of when the original stories started coming out, when Bo Xilai had been arrested and we started to hear about the death of Neil Haywood and we started to find out about corruption and Guagua ran away to to the US and didn't come back. And we started, we had all of these things happening. In the aftermath of that, we had something very, very interesting. We had the foreign media, including the Financial Times, but particularly, I would say, to give them credit, Bloomberg and New York Times. And what they did is they first went and investigated, Bloomberg went and investigated the family money of Xi Jinping. And they came up with a number, which is probably a little low, but about $360 million. And then the New York Times went and did a big investigation, and they came out with a number for Wen Jiabao of probably close to $2.6 billion. And my argument is that if the Bo Xilai case hadn't happened, and we weren't chasing these stories so avidly last year, that those stories would also not have come out, and that the aftermath of the Bo Xilai case and the sort of ongoing fallout has been almost as significant as the original case itself in eroding the legitimacy of the top leadership. Now, I'll tell you something very interesting. There's a professor I'm not going to name because I haven't asked their permission, but I'll tell you a little bit about their research. This professor does a lot of work at the grassroots level in China, grassroots political level in China. And this person has said that in the last year or so, they've been conducting a whole lot of field work. And what they've found is, in the past, at the very local level, at the local political level and the local, just the average peasant farmer in the countryside, there used to be a deep belief in the cleanness and the honesty of the very top leadership. When you asked Nongmin, you asked a peasant farmer, what's wrong with your life? Do you care about corruption? If you ask them about corruption, they say, yes, the local party secretary is very corrupt, but Grandpa Wen is very clean. Wen Ye is very, very good. He's a good official. He's a clean official. He cares about me, and he cares about the Lao Baixing. This professor, over the last year, has found a huge drop in the, and they haven't published it yet, so I won't name them, but they found a huge drop in the faith of the average grassroots cadre, particularly, which was very, very interesting, in the central leadership. That it used to be that it was only the local officials who were corrupt and dirty. Now people believe that it's everyone. And now you go down to a village in Henan or a village in Liaoning, and you can hear everyone's gossiping. I say, oh, do you know how much money so-and-so has? Oh, what about Wang Qishan? What about so-and-so? So it's amazing. And this, I think this research will come out pretty soon, and it's going to be quite shocking how much a decline in this belief in the good emperor phenomenon, that at the very top the people are good and clean. Although the sums that are involved, and the details that are involved were quite contained, still we got some very shocking details, which I argue is very, very significant. In the Wang Lijun trial, we got a piece of evidence that I've never seen anywhere before, but I think is done enormous damage to the image of the police and the image of the legal system. Most people, if you've been in China a long time and you think about Chinese politics, you cover Chinese politics, or you think about it in any way in your life, you would kind of assume that the police are corrupt, right? If you've had to deal with police in your life, or you've seen the way they work, then you would assume they were corrupt. And you would assume that if you were very wealthy and well-connected, and someone you knew was in prison, you could probably get them out of prison with a bit of money. But it's a different thing assuming that and getting hard factual evidence of that. And in the Wang Lijun trial, something amazing came out in that trial, even though that was very, very heavily censored. Again, another open trial, where in this one we were allowed 1 block away. In the Wang Lijun trial, we were 3 blocks away. But something amazing came out through the Wang Lijun trial in the Xinhua report at the end. A famous businessman, they didn't name him, famous businessman from the northeast of China, bought 2 apartments for Wang Lijun's sister in Beijing. And in exchange, he released 3 prisoners in Chongqing. So for the price of 2 apartments, villa apartments in Beijing, the police chief of one of the biggest city provinces in China released prisoners who were waiting to be investigated, waiting to go on trial. in the Bo Xilai trial, we saw other extremely damaging evidence, even though it was still very tightly prescribed. We still saw the lifestyle of Bo Guagua. And we saw him getting on a plane, a private jet, paid for by his mummy's friend, getting on a private jet and flying to Africa with his buddies. The private jet cost 70, 80,000 US dollars, and then he spent 1 or 2 weeks in Africa, and it cost $50,000. I don't know if any of you have traveled to Africa, but $50,000 in Africa means that you're staying at treetops and you're staying in some really, really nice resorts and having a really, really nice time. The amount of damage I think that's done to the image. So many people would have assumed, oh yes, if you're Hong Ardai, if you're children of senior officials, you have a pretty nice life and everything's great. But very, very few people get to see it firsthand, and very, very few people get to see hard evidence of this. So what we saw from those examples was, even in its stage-managed and very curtailed way, the trial showed how power and money interact in China, and the way that officials and their relatives can demand favors and money and the good life on call. I mean, we saw these amazing transcripts where Xu Ming and Bo Xilai explained how it worked. She would literally just pick up the phone, or she didn't even have to pick up the phone. She sent her mishu, her secretary, to go tell Xu Ming, Bo Guagua wants a Segway, or Bo Guagua wants to go to Africa, or Bo Guagua wants he wants you to pay off his credit card, which has got 3 million RMB of debt on it. If only we all had a Xu Ming. So, now, I'm going to go through it a little bit faster because I want to leave you time for questions. But one of the things that's really fascinating about all of this is that Bo Xilai was actually incredibly popular in Chongqing. He was very popular in Dalian before that. I first met Bo Xilai in the Bra Wars of 2005. So it sounds very exciting, but it wasn't that exciting. What it was in 2005, the EU and China were having to renegotiate some trade duties and some trade deals, because what was happening is cheap Chinese bras and underwear and T-shirts were flooding into Europe, and Europe was worried that this was going to kill off the industry in Europe. So the Chinese side sat down with the European side, and on the European side was a very interesting guy. His name is Lord Peter Mandelson. Lord Peter Mandelson is famous in Britain for being the mastermind, the spin doctor, the Lord of Darkness, as they called him, who brought the New Labour into power. He was the chief spin doctor, and he calls himself the third man, after Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, and he was number 3, the third man. So after he helped, he's renowned as a brilliant spin doctor, of someone who can manipulate the media like nobody else. And after he helped to bring New Labour into power, he then went to be the trade commissioner for the EU. So he came over to negotiate with Bo Xilai. And this is when I first met Bo Xilai. He was the commerce minister, and I was working actually for the South China Morning Post in Beijing. What Peter Mandelson tried to do was something that he's done many, many times in the past, what he's done many, many times in negotiations, was manipulate the media to his advantage, to fight Bo Xilai in the public opinion sphere. So what he did one night, and it was amazing to watch these guys actually, because Mandelson, when he's not talking, he does this thing for the cameras. He knows there are cameras everywhere when he's giving a press conference or he's talking. So when he's not talking, he does these poses, which he knows will be the front page picture the next day. And it was quite astonishing to watch, because there you'd have Mandelson going, Meanwhile, on the other side, when Bo Xilai would stop talking, he'd do the same thing, but much cooler. So you got these incredible pictures of these two guys posing for the cameras in this amazing way. Now, Mandelson decided, we could tell what was going on a little bit, but I never really worked out exactly what had happened until a year or two later. So what happened is, Mandelson invited the European journalists down to the Beijing Fandian, the Beijing hotel in downtown Beijing. And that was where the negotiations were being held. And Mandelson, without telling the Chinese side, brought down all these European journalists and made us sit outside the room where they were doing the negotiating. And it got later and later and later. And clearly what he was doing was trying to pressure the Chinese side into agreeing to a deal because otherwise the journalists are going to go away and say there was no deal. And it was, and so Mandelson thought, looking at it from his Western spin doctor perspective, that he could pressure Bo Xilai into getting what he wanted. So it got later and later and later. It got to about 1 o'clock. It got almost 2 a.m. in the morning, right? And all these journalists sitting outside getting more and more angry and cursing Bo Xilai and Peter Mandelson. And then just before, about half an hour, 40 minutes before the European news deadline. So this was a period, this is before the internet really got going. So this was just before the newspaper deadlines, the last deadline. Bo Xilai threw open the door and stormed out of the meeting room. And behind him, all his little people came running behind him. And there we looked through the door, and there was Lord Peter Mandelson sitting there just like, oh my God, what's going on? So what do you think the headlines were the next day? Chinese storm out of negotiations. Bo Xilai was back at 8 a.m. the next morning, smiling, and, oh, hey, how you doing? How'd you like those headlines in your newspapers back home? And he came back to the negotiating table in a far stronger position because Peter Mandelson was basically being blamed for this negotiation falling apart at the last minute. I really didn't get it until like a year later, and I was like, my God, that's just genius, It was a really brilliant thing that he did, and he did it on purpose. I don't know if many people know in this room, do you know what Bo Xilai's major was, what he has a master's degree in? Journalism. Journalism, yeah. Very interesting. This guy, I say in my ebook, at the very end of my ebook, I quote someone who says that if there were to be an election, had been an election at the end of, say, 2011 or early 2012 in China, general election, Bo Xilai would almost certainly have been elected president of China. He was so good at manipulating the media. He was so brilliant at putting out populist messages. In the cities where he lived, there were some people who really hated him, especially the ones who got arrested because they were supposedly gangsters. But most of the people thought he planted lots of trees, he cleaned up the streets, he got rid of crime, he gave a lot of money for social housing, a lot of money for social welfare. He provided the things that people wanted. And for an older generation, he encouraged them to changhongge, to sing red songs and to be nostalgic and to take pride in the things that they had become somewhat embarrassed about in more recent years. So he was extremely popular. And as a measure of his popularity, I would say what we're seeing right now is Xi Jinping having to borrow many of the things that Bo Xilai put into place. So anti-corruption, that's straight out of the Bo Xilai Chongqing handbook. The talking about the mass line, straight out of Bo Xilai's handbook. The idea that we cannot use the last 30 years to negate the previous 30 years. That's also straight from Bo Xilai. What he's having to do is, in order to neutralize the lingering and very powerful influence of Bo Xilai, he's had to go very far to the left, or much further to the left than many people thought he was going to. And he's had to do that because he recognizes there is a very strong constituency for many of the things that Bo Xilai was promoting. I'll leave you just with a couple of interesting thoughts before I get on to the pictures. It's really fascinating for me, and it's really amazing when you think about it, that if Bo Xilai had not slapped the face of his police chief, and if Wang Lijun, the police chief, hadn't been so clever and had such a clever little escape route to the American consulate, then probably Bo Xilai would be in the standing committee of the Politburo today, and possibly getting rid of those term limits and doing all those things that I suggested he would. Now, my take on it, just in a nutshell, why many people have asked me this, and many people have wondered, was Bo Xilai taken out by his political enemies? Was it a case of political persecution? It's a somewhat simplistic way of looking at it, but people ask this all the time. People who've only sort of read a few articles, they say, oh, it's all just political persecution. I don't think so, because I don't think that the Communist Party would have wanted any of this. Foreign journalists, hundreds of them turning up at the courtroom everyone picking apart all these details of the top leadership's lifestyle. I don't think anyone at all in the senior leadership of the Communist Party thinks that this has been a great exercise in public relations for the Communist Party. I think what happened, and this is just my theory, I have some proof on it, and I talk about it a bit in my book, but it's still yet to be decisively proved. My theory is that what was happening is, in the lead up to the Shibada, the 18th Party Congress, when you were going to get this once in a generation, a once every decade transition of power, you had these vicious battles going on behind the scenes, as you do every 5 years, every 10 years. And what was happening is that Bo Xilai's political enemies, of which there were many, 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 they were trying to find a way to make sure that he did not rise up to the very top ranks, that he didn't get from the Politburo into the Standing Committee of the Politburo, because they were very scared that once he did, he would change all the rules. So what they were doing is, and we can speculate on who those political enemies were, but what they were doing is, they were doing the classic investigation. What you do is you start with the mistress or the driver or the secretary or the former secretary, and you find some bad dirt about that person. Then you get them into prison, and then you detain them, and you basically then get them to give you dirt on their boss. And then you get the dirt on the boss, then you go up a level and an upper level. You start very low and you work your way up. Now, we have evidence that that was going on with Wang Lijun at least, because in the months leading up to when he ran away to the US consulate, a vice mayor of Tieling, where he used to be based, was given 14 years in prison. The mayor, I think it was, or the police chief of Tieling was given 12 years in prison. And another vice mayor was found floating dead in a canal in Shenyang. So my theory, and I think it's a very strong theory, and I've run it past many people and they mostly agree with me, my theory is that what was happening is the enemies of Bo Xilai were working their way towards Bo Xilai, starting in Tieling and working their way up, and they were getting close to Wang Lijun. I do believe that Gu Kailai killed Neil Haywood with cyanide in the Lucky Holiday Hotel, where I've stayed, by the way. Very spooky place. Very poorly named, or unfortunately named, the Lucky Holiday Hotel. So I believe that that did happen, and that those facts, as put forward by the party and the government, are basically true. I think that Wang Lijun helped her to do that, because I think he probably helped her and other people to do that sort of thing relatively often, not usually with foreigners, but relatively often. I think that when he got wind of the investigation that was coming close to him, he realized that the ultimate target was Bo Xilai. And he knew that if he could go to Bo Xilai and get his protection, or if he could go and show him that he had this terrible information about his wife, that maybe Bo Xilai would choose to put their fates together instead of cutting him loose and trying to insulate himself. So he made the calculation, I'll go to Bo Xilai and I'll say, the investigation is getting close to me. By the way, what would you like me to do with all the evidence I have about your wife murdering this foreign dude? And, you know, blackmail, basically, but I'm sure he said it in a nice way. And Bo Xilai, at that moment, had a choice. He could try and protect this guy, and maybe he would survive. Or he could try and get rid of this guy, and maybe he would then be able to survive the ensuing investigation. If they don't have Wang Lijun, then maybe they don't have enough to take him down. So he fired Wang Lijun, and he punched him in the head, and he prepared some documents saying that Wang Lijun was mentally unstable. So the idea was that he was going to discredit Wang Lijun, he was going to throw him in a mental institution, and no one would ever hear from him again. His big miscalculation was not killing or putting Wang Lijun in the mental institution before he could get to the US consulate. So I don't think any of this was planned. I don't think, you know, some people talk about conspiracies of, I think none of it could possibly have been put together in the way it was put together. You'd have to get the US Consul General and the US government on side, probably, if you really wanted to orchestrate something like that, and I think that would be, well, that's certainly impossible. So I'm just going to leave you with a quote before I get onto some pictures and go through them quickly. This is from Francis Fukuyama, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with. He's now a senior fellow at Stanford University, but he's the author of a book called The End of History and the Last Man, and he wrote a book more recently talking about political systems and focusing a lot on China. And so he said to me in a recent conversation that we had that Bo Xilai was really a potential bad emperor. He was the only one in the elite circle with the charisma to break out of the post-Mao consensus. If Bo had been promoted, he could have upended the system and broken all the rules. So that's Francis Fukuyama. I agree with that completely. Now what I'm going to do, before I open it up to some questions, is just to wake you all up a little bit. I'm going to go through some of the pictures, because this will give you... I haven't seen these put together, all of these put together in such a easy to understand and simple way. This is the trial, as I explained. That's Bo Xilai coming in the police van. It was only the people with giant zoom lenses who could tell which car he was in. We were all like, is that him? Is that him? Oh. This is him in front of the trial. Now, I would point your attention to the two men standing on the side, either side of Bo Xilai. Bo Xilai is about this tall. He's slightly taller than me. I mean, he's a big guy. This is why I think that the government decided to hold the trial in Shandong. Because if they were to hold the trial in Guangzhou or in Hunan or Sichuan, they wouldn't have been able to find guys who are that huge. This was all about projecting power, diminishing Bo Xilai, making Bo Xilai look small and powerless and insignificant. You have to have guys who are much, much bigger to standing next to him. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, because there's some controversy about where those guys came from. So in the next little photo on the right, you'll see there was much discussed image of Bo Xilai where he looks like he's doing the OK sign upside down, right? So there are a lot of people say, oh, that means he's telling his family, oh, I'm going to be okay, no problem. Or maybe I'm only going to get 30 years, or, you know, the money, the combination to the safe is 303, whatever. We don't know what he really meant. Maybe he just had sore fingers. In the next photo on the bottom, you can see on the far left, the circle around this left guy, that's Bo Xilai's son from his first marriage. The next woman is Gu Kailai's older sister, and the next two circled heads are Bo Xilai's brothers. The one with glasses actually lives in Hong Kong most of the time. So one really interesting thing was, and this actually, we found the original photo and then we couldn't find the original. It looked like it had been photoshopped. But if you notice the badge numbers, they're the same number. It's quite interesting, isn't it? Actually, that one has been photoshopped, I think, to make it look like one number is different. But in the original ones we pulled off from the screen, which we didn't have, unfortunately, later, they've been wiped, but they were the same number. And now this guy on the left, many people think that he's not actually a policeman at all, that he's a famous basketball player who became a coach. And if you look at the photos of the famous basketball player turned coach, they do bear a striking resemblance, don't they? And he's from Shandong. He's from the Shandong, coach of one of the Shandong teams. This is quite an astonishing picture, I think, because you've got the accuser and the accused, the man who brought him down and the man himself, you know, the red nobility, the Hong Er Dai, sitting there with his accuser. And maybe, I don't know what the wheelchair's there and what that's all about, but I talked to Wang Lijun's sister recently. I managed to meet her at Wang Lijun's trial. I'm the only one who got her phone number, luckily. She came up to a group of journalists, and none of the others could speak Chinese. And we originally thought she was a petitioner, just trying to give us a petition, so we're kind of ignoring her. And then she said, I'm Wang Lijun's sister. Well, what's Wang Lijun? Mei Mei. And I was like, right, come with me. Don't talk to them. And luckily, none of the journalists standing nearby could speak Chinese, so they had no idea. And I just snuck her away and got her number. And so I talked to her recently, just a few weeks ago, and she said she was very happy that Wang Lijun was in Qincheng prison in the outskirts of Beijing, in this big political prison. She said he gets fruit every day, he has a very nice meals, he gets to watch TV, he has a very leisurely life, and he's not worried about getting murdered by Bo Xilai or gangsters or anyone else. So So the whole family's pretty pleased about how that turned out, actually. Even though it looks like he may be in a wheelchair, he's still pretty happy. This is, I didn't mention him much before, but this is a very important person in the trial of Bo Xilai, in the case of Bo Xilai. This is Xu Ming. He was the chairman of Dalian Shide, which is a big company from Dalian. Let me just show you a series of pictures. So this was the money man. This was, they call him the white glove, or the guy who basically held the money, gave the money to the Bo family. He's the one who paid for the private jet and the Segway and the villa in France. But presumably he's only one of many of these people. But they've decided to pick one, and he's the one. Let me show you a couple of pictures here. So this is Gu Kailai at her trial in August last year, in the top left, and there's her again on the left there. Now this is her. This is just in like August this year, so a year later, and there you have Xu Ming before and after. So there's a joke going around on the Chinese internet saying the best weight loss program, the best health club in the world has to be the Zhongjiwei, the Central Discipline and Inspection Commission, because look at the wonders they can work on weight loss. And yeah, this is a picture taken by a friend of my news assistant, actually, who used to work for FT Chinese. And this is Guagua, just probably about a few days before his father was convicted. It's not a great look. He's in a bar in New York City, drinking and partying. And this did bad things for Bo Guagua's image. I interviewed Bo Guagua many times. We spoke on the phone quite a few times until my ebook came out, and then he refused to talk to me ever again. I have to say I'm very proud that I respected. Most of our conversations were off the record. I never used anything that he explicitly said was off the record. I never used anything that he told me that he asked me not to put in the paper, and I've still to this day not done that, even though he refuses to talk to me anymore. This is an astonishing picture. I mean, for a guy who ran a city province that is the size of Austria and has the population of Canada. Now look at him. Here we go back a little bit. These are some charming family photos. This is Bo, as you see on the left. Bo Xilai is the top right, but with his brothers and sisters. There he is again, very handsome young man, handsome young student. There he is again. He's the second from the left. Now, just for those who maybe, I'm sure all of you are aware, but just in case you're not aware of just how important Bo Xilai and his family are, this is obviously Mao Zedong, Zhou Enlai, and Bo Xilai's father. Here is Bo Xilai's father with Deng Xiaoping. Here is Bo Xilai's father with Hu Jintao, former head of the Navy, and that guy was the head of the propaganda department. And I think he went to jail later on, but funny he hasn't been airbrushed out. I don't know why. And there, I think in the top right, very interesting picture of Bo walking behind Jiang Zemin. So this one, can anyone tell me who that guy on the left is? Does anyone know? So on the right is obviously Bo, but who's the guy on the left, the older guy? It's Xi Zhongxun, Xi Jinping's father. I think this is an amazing picture, right? Because what this shows us is that today it's the children of the revolution who are having to consume each other. They're having to eat each other in order to try and preserve the system that created them. I think it's a really interesting, and I think if you look at the body language, it's hard to tell, but I think if you look at the body language, I would say that Bo is Da Ge, and Xi Zhongxun is Xiao Di. So he's the big brother and he's the little brother, and the respect is much more from this side that way. And I think that's another reason why Xi Jinping had to give Bo Xilai such a stiff sentence, and why they have to make sure he doesn't ever come back. This is right near the end of the Cultural Revolution. That's Bo after he'd been in prison and he'd been in hospital for a while. He was in prison for, I think it was all more than 12 years. Bo Xilai on the front left, he'd also been in prison as well. But he'd then been on a farm, that's why he's looking quite tough and strong. Their mother, of course, was killed in the Cultural Revolution, probably murdered, maybe committed suicide. Some people say on a train from Beijing down to Guangzhou. Now, this is, I think this is really interesting. This is Bo Xilai with his first wife. And his first wife was from a very good political family at a time that his family was not a good family. And there are many people who've said many mean things that, about how this, the young Bo Xilai felt that he needed, in order to rehabilitate his family fortunes and his own fortunes, he needed to marry someone very powerful from a good family. Of course, later on, he left her for Bo Xilai, the mother of Bo Guagua. The official story says that she was on a study trip or a music trip or something to the countryside in Dongbei in Liaoning province. And they met and they fell in love and it was all lovely. In fact, they started a relationship at Peking University while he was still very much married to his first wife. And so they had an affair for many years. But the problem was that he was not allowed to divorce his wife. Number one, his first wife was a doctor in the army, and the army would have to approve if you wanted, at that time, if you wanted to get a divorce. Number two, her father was still very, very important. But something happened in the years, in the sort of mid to late 80s. Bo Yibo was rehabilitated. He became far more important. So what he did is he went down to her father, their first wife's father, and he said, he lobbied very hard, and he managed to get the father to agree to a divorce. Eventually, the divorce went through, and Bo Xilai married Bo Xilai. But very interestingly, the father of his first wife, Li Danyu, the father made one condition. He said, okay, I'll agree to the divorce, but until I die, Bo Xilai can never come back and work in Beijing. He can never come and work in the central government. He can never work here in the center. And do you know what happened? Bo Xilai never came back to Beijing until her father, the first wife's father, died in 2003. He never came back. It's an astonishing fact, which I think tells so much about how these deals amongst the powerful families, these deals amongst the people who really run China are so important, and how they're honored, and these secret agreements that many of them we don't even know about. Just run through this quickly. This is Bo Xilai in his heyday. If any of you followed the trial closely, if you look in the background, those hot air balloons featured quite prominently in the trial because they were apparently corruptly, they were bought corruptly. These are quite interesting. This is, you probably, if you know Chinese princelings, you recognize that's Chen Xiaodan, the Serena Chen, she calls herself. Dan Dan to her friends. And she is the granddaughter of Chen Yun and the daughter of Chen Yuan, the head of the China Development Bank. And her and Guagua were dating for a while, not anymore. These are some of his other girlfriends. These are some pictures that got his dad into quite a lot of trouble when they came out a couple of years ago on Facebook, because they don't sort of show the kind of sober-minded, great scholar that he was supposedly being at Oxford. He was interested in other things. In fact, he was rusticated for a year for his some of these activities, probably. I love these pictures. This is the police chief, Wang Lijun. This is Bo Xilai with Xu Ming, Wang Lijun with a famous comedian and Xu Ming. And this is everybody admiring Wang Lijun, who looks very proud of his calligraphy. And at the top is Wang Lijun and Bo Xilai. As we found out in the trial of Bo Xilai, they were actually lovers, according to Bo Xilai. This is Peter Mandelson. So it wasn't just Chinese people who recognized how powerful the red blood, the red nobility could be. It was also foreigners really gravitated to Bo Xilai. They knew this guy was a big deal. So here's Henry Kissinger, here's Peter Mandelson, that's Stephen Harper. That was the very last meeting that Bo Xilai did before he was arrested, meeting with anyone outside of central leadership. And there's U.S. Commerce Secretary Gutierrez. I've met this guy, Mao Xinyu. He's the grandson of Mao Zedong. Very interesting guy. I've met him a few times, actually. I feel really sorry for him because what will happen when you're interviewing Mao Xinyu is the handlers will say, stop, 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 and you turn off the cameras, turn off the recording devices, all the videos, everything. And then they'll go up, and the guy will be sitting there, and they'll adjust him because they think his coat's ridden up or whatever, and they'll whisper what to tell, what he's supposed to say next. And he's really, I feel very sorry for him, actually. He lives in this very weird bubble where they're trying to manage his image. They don't do a very good job, I have to say, of managing the image, because he comes across as in the media often in China, as a buffoon, and yeah, I won't say anything more mean about him, but I feel very sorry for him. Very briefly, I think these are very interesting. This is Deng Pufeng, the son of Deng Xiaoping, and there he is ignoring Bo Xilai as he goes right past him. Look at the body language of Wen Jiabao. I think that's fascinating, right? He's just like, oh, looks like he's going to catch germs or cooties or something from Bo Xilai. I've put the pictures of Zhou Yongkang up there because I think it's really interesting how much the government seems to be going after Zhou Yongkang now, and I'm happy to talk about that in question time if you like. It's a very interesting case right now. Some more pictures, very interesting pictures here, which have been scrubbed from the internet, of course, but we had backup copies. This is Xi Jinping meeting with Wang Lijun and Bo Xilai, and very interesting. These are some fascinating pictures of the strike hard. So that's the police, the centerpiece for Bo Xilai's, Wang Lijun's campaign. These are the female police officers who were handpicked by Wang Lijun and whose uniforms were designed by Wang Lijun. He actually literally had the patent on all of these designs for these. And if you've been to Chongqing recently, you cannot see any of these uniforms anywhere anymore. They've been purged along with the leaders. These are some of the photos from the Strike Hard campaign. That's Wen Qiang was the chief of police who was executed, chief of police before Bo Xilai, who was executed. Neil Haywood, the guy who died. I quite like this one. This is the last public appearance of the one on the left, not on the right. Last public appearance of Wang Lijun before he ran to the U.S. consulate. He ran away like an hour after this. The story is that he dressed as a woman and ran away. That was how he managed to get past the guards that Bo Xilai had put. So this is an artist rendering. I think he looks quite good. But, not a real picture, unfortunately. If only we would, yeah. Those are the police cars, the paramilitary and police that Bo Xilai sent to try and get him back. This is Bo Xilai right after Wang Lijun ran away. He went down and did something very interesting. He went down to the headquarters of the 14th Route Army, which is the army that was set up by his father, Bo Yibo, and Shizijun, it's called in Chinese. And in the headquarters, there's a statue of his father, and this image, he played it on local TV and on Chongqing TV. This freaked the hell out of the senior leadership because the signal that they took it to mean is that he's saying, right, you want to take me down? Watch what's going to happen. I'm going to run away and get all my buddies in the PLA, and we're going to fight you. We're going to do a Mao Zedong and go up in the hills and fight you from the, you know. So I think these images gave the government, this scared Xi Jinping and Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao, scared them more than anything, was the sight of a princeling going and talking about how his roots in the military. That's Wang Yang and one of his rivals, and that's him right before he went down. Another artist rendering. So, you know, I was the first to report this actually as a journalist. One of the very amazing things, we were all there watching. I was watching through binoculars, watching his face and seeing his expressions and stuff. But after this meeting finished, where he was photographed, after that finished, the one on the left, I think, he got up and he walked out and he was arrested right there, just stage right. Nobody knew in the audience at the time. It wasn't announced till a day later. But he was literally taken as soon as he left the stage by the Central Guard. This is just a little plug for my ebook. It's a little bit out of date, but most of the central facts are correct, and we haven't had to really fix anything. But we're going to probably update it at some point. But that's the title. Now, I know we've run a little bit over time, but I've been told that we have the room till 7. And if you're happy to stay, I'm happy to stay. I'm happy to answer questions until 7, if you like, or unless we have to run. But if anyone has anything they'd like to ask, I'm more than happy to answer questions about this or anything. I can just use this one. Oh, he's got one.
Thank you. I think it's really amazing lecture because I came from Liaoning, Shenyang. So when I was 6, I got a chance to sing for Bo Xilai. It's the first time to meet the leader of our province. So back to that time, I think that's all I remember is that's a really nice grandpa, because he shake our hands and say, oh, well, you guys really did a great job. You sang very well, something like that. So I really want to ask is that, do you think for most of the Chinese people, we are fooled by the government, or we are cheated by ourselves, like our real deep inside, we want to trust the government is clean, is free of any evil things. So from a very professional perspective. Thank you.
Okay. I would just say, first of all, that when I first met him, I really liked him too. He was the only Chinese leader who, he didn't actually remember my name. It's quite a hard name to remember. But he was the only one who remembered who I was. So I met him once, did an interview. And then the next time I saw him, he's like, oh, 南华早报, South China Morning Post. Amazing. He remembered. He was very good. He was an extremely personable guy. Everyone who ever met him said, wow, charming, very smooth, just the kind of guy you'd like to have tea with. I mean, I saw him as an uncle, not a grandpa, but I really liked him. I thought, you know, wow, this guy's really cool. But when I talked to people who had worked for him, people who'd worked in the system under him, he was a very different person if you had to work for him. And he was a very different person if he decided he wanted to take you down for some reason. If he wanted to use his power against you, then I think he was a really, really nasty guy. And he did nasty things to a lot of people. I have some stories in the book, which I won't get into now because they're long, and but some really awful stories that we found out about him later on. To answer your question, is the government fooling you? Or are you fooling yourselves? I think it's getting harder and harder for the government to fool anyone with the rise of Weibo, with the rise of social media, and with the internet in general, and all the VPN technology, the fanqiang you can do. And I think that is making it increasingly difficult for the government to lie to the people. I think that people are less willing to be lied to. I think that today many people have enough to eat. Most people have enough to eat. Many people have houses and cars and washing machines. And the thing that they want next is dignity. What they want is a government that doesn't lie to them all the time. They want clean government. Until recently, I think that most people assumed that at the very top, it was such a pressure cooker, and it was such a shark pit that it was quite difficult to be corrupt at the top. But I think what people are starting to assume now is that when you get to the very top, you're in a club and you all look after each other and you look after each other's interests. And that, from my perspective, I've been in China 13 years and I've been a journalist for about a decade of that. And I've gotten to know quite a few government officials. I've gotten to know quite a few of the Hong'ai or Hongsandai, and I've got to meet quite a few of the people within the system. And it's interesting for me that the people who are most cynical about China, the ones who are the most negative about the future, tend to be the people in the elite and at the very top, in my experience. And it's just a change that's happened in the last 2 or 3 years. So I think that, I guess to answer your question in a roundabout way, people are less willing to be lied to, and the government is less able to lie to people. And even at the very top, the elite and the power players at the very top feel that things are going to have to change.
Thanks for a fascinating presentation. This whole chain of events you've described, as you've described it, came about because Wang Lijun went to the American consulate and sort of spilled the beans In fact, when he was at the American consulate, that was a major media event publicized in the outside world. So the leadership had to do something to take care of that. But Mr. Hayward had died several months before that. That affair was kind of over. My question is, why did Wang Lijun go to the American consulate rather than the British consulate, the closest British consulate? Because, that's the job of the British embassy and consulate, to protect their citizens and make sure nothing untoward happens to them.
Sure, I've got a serious and a more flippant answer. So, the reason you went to the US consulate is because it's the only source of freedom, democracy, and truth in the world is the American government. I know that's what you'd like to hear. That's the flippant answer, non-serious. No, so to answer your question, Wang Lijun made 2 appointments, one at the British consulate and another one at the US consulate. The British consulate in Western China is in Chongqing. The US one is in Chengdu. Wang Lijun knew that if he went to a consulate, this is what we assume, he made the appointment in the British consulate as a way to distract Bo Xilai. But he knew if he tried to get into the door of the British consulate in Chongqing, that he would probably be stopped. They were ready for him, though they would at least have noticed him much faster. Whereas if he made a feint towards he faked towards the British consulate and then he went to the US consulate 3 hours drive away, he was much less likely to get caught. It's a classic, spy maneuver. I mean, he was in charge of the intelligence services in Chongqing, right? So, I mean, it was a smart move to do, really. I mean, and he also probably, and I would say this is being borne out more recently, he probably realized that of all the governments in the world, the one that had a shot of sticking up to China is probably America. I mean, Britain has shown itself less able to stick up to other countries, not just China, but other countries in more recent times, weeks even. And I think also that he recognized, I'm sure he was aware that Xi Jinping was about to go to the US 1 week later. So he knew that he had this amazing opportunity to get himself just, all over the headlines, all over the world, if that's what he really had to do. So I think he really recognized that. I mean, it was a trick, but it was also that he figured he would be safest in the U.S. consulate. Now, after watching all of this, the case of Wang Lijun running to the consulate and Bo Xilai being detained and arrested in March. Then we had Chen Guangcheng, if you remember. It was right after that, at the end of March. Chen Guangcheng ran to the US Embassy. And we were just sitting there going, wow, you couldn't get better propaganda for the American government than a dissident on one end and the persecuting police chief, member of the establishment, anti-foreign guy. These guys, within a month of each other, 2 months of each other, running to the only source of freedom, democracy, and truth in the world. Now, I would have to say that this year, the American propaganda has kind of broken down somewhat with fiscal cliffs and various other things. But yeah, I thought that was an amazing couple of months, and it really did wonders. More good for America's message to China, the Chinese world at least, than almost anything else. Of course, well timed, exactly. Yeah.
Thanks for your presentation, and it seems that you really admire Bo Xilai, but many people criticize that his behavior goes extremely. For example, in his movement of Chang Hong Da, he used many illegal procedures, and in his movement of Chang Hong Ge, it seems he want to go back to the period of Mao Zedong. So some people are afraid he will take China back to the period of Mao Zedong. So what's your opinion? And do you think he will be a better leader than Xi Jinping? Thank you.
Okay, I'll answer that quite simply. I don't think he would be a better leader than Xi Jinping. And the reason is because of exactly what you pointed out. I think he was populist, an opportunist, and he was dangerous because he was the kind of guy who believed really only in his own power and his own promotion into power. So I think that I don't believe at all that he was a Maoist. If you go back to Liaoning and Dalian, he was the one saying open doors and bring the Japanese in. I mean, God, you couldn't be less of a Maoist than inviting Japanese investment into Dalian. I think he was a demagogue. He was the kind of person. He was a political opportunist and a brilliant populist. I think that's what he was good at. And what I meant when I admire him, I admired his people skills, and I thought he was a very charming guy when I met him in person. As a politician, I think he was extremely dangerous for the same reasons that I think Xi Jinping, Wen Jiabao, Hu Jintao, and the others felt that he was very dangerous. So no, I think Xi Jinping will do a much better job than Bo Xilai could have.
Thank you very much for the talk. In your talk, you mentioned Zhou Yongkang. I would like to hear your take on what will happen to him, because on the one hand, he's one of those few people who is not supposed to be charged by the party, but on the other hand, he's a very important power on the Bo Xilai's camp. So if your theory is correct, then he's the next one to be taken down, right? So I would like to hear what you think about him.
Sure. The FT has written quite a few stories. Just because of the sensitivity, the author of those stories tends to be FT reporters. So I won't confirm or deny whether I wrote them or how much I know. I know what I read in the Financial Times. Let's just put it that way. I think what's going on with Zhou Yongkang is very, very interesting. I said at the beginning, mentioned Bo Xilai, Xi Jinping's talking about how he has to get rid of flies and tigers. I think that Bo Xilai doesn't count as a tiger. I think Bo Xilai counts as a dead tiger, as I said at the beginning. So I think in order to boost his legitimacy, Xi Jinping still needs, and probably feels he still needs, to take down a real tiger. And if you read the South China Morning Post, for example, then that is possibly in the works at the moment. I tend to think from a purely, I mean, if I was at the top leadership level, it's a huge risk, right? The idea that you take down a Politburo standing committee member, former standing committee member, that's never happened since the Cultural Revolution. So you'd be breaking another one of these unwritten rules that is out there. But interestingly, I had a very good source. I haven't reported it because I don't have a second or third source, but I have one very good source who's told me that there was a meeting earlier this year. Jiang Zemin attended that meeting, and at the meeting, the decision was made that from now on, this is in about March or April, I think, the decision was made that from now on, the Wang Qishan and the discipline inspectors, the anti-corruption body, can go after former and serving standing committee of Politburo members. Until now, it's only been Politburo, not above that. So if that person is right, if this very good source is right, which I think they probably are, judging on their background and everything, then that would pave the way. If Xi Jinping wants to, he can take down Zhou Yongkang without offending the elders, without offending the other members of the top leadership. Now, why would he want to do it? I've been sitting there every day, we've been arguing back and forth. Why would you? I mean, it's crazy. But the main reason you do it is because you felt that you needed still to prove how tough you are and how legitimate you are, showing that you have the whole system in your hand. And that would be by taking out a real tiger. And if you look at how many people have been arrested in Zhou Yongkang's circle, it's about 35 people have been taken down, including his former secretaries, his former drivers, his former, everyone. His son is apparently in prison at the moment, or at least being held in an undisclosed location. So I would say that all the signs are that Xi Jinping is preparing to take him down, but whether or not he makes that last final step remains to be seen. If he feels that he's solidified and consolidated his power enough, maybe he doesn't have to take him out. Because it sets a terrible precedent. When he steps down, what's to say the next lot aren't going to take him out? So.
Thank you so much for your talk. I have a question. I started thinking about the Gang of Four connection, which you brought up at the beginning of the talk. I could see how this trial is like the Gang of Four insofar as it's a show trial, it's a reassertion of party control. But then I was thinking about the ways in which it's different. And the Gang of Four trial was about past action, whereas here we have a preemptive strike against future dangers or future action. And then the Gang of Four trial was a closure of an era and a kind of collective reckoning, whereas here, according to your talk, it seems like this trial has opened up more problems than it's put to a close. So I wanted to ask, how has this comparison been made among the Chinese? Is there talk of this being like the Gang of Four trial, and in what ways?
Well, I mean, it's talked about all over Weibo, of course, people putting the pictures next to each other, and the way that Bo Xilai reacted, right, was very similar to the way that Jiang Qing reacted. She got up there and said, "You don't have the authority, this court." I mean, he didn't go quite as far as she did by, saying that the whole process was illegitimate. He said, he scoffed and laughed at the charges, but he didn't say, very interestingly, another way I guess it's slightly different, he didn't say the whole process was illegitimate. So that was quite interesting, actually. But on Weibo, it was, and around the time of the trial, it was very, there's the main comparison you can make, because this was the most significant trial since then. I guess what I mean when I say it's, the main similarity I find is that if you look at the way justice was served, right, the way that the decision was a very political decision, the way that the courts carried out the action, but the way that the courts and the whole system felt that they needed to legitimize the process somehow, right? The way that they had to have to call it an open trial, the way that Xinhua has to say the trial of Bo Xilai shows the openness of the Chinese system and shows the rule of law has come to China. I mean, that is very similar. And I would say the fundamentals haven't changed really at all. The medium that it's delivered through has changed. It's faster and it's Weibo and it's, but the fundamental procedure, right? I guess the differences you mentioned, I agree with you completely, but the procedure hasn't changed, right? The top leadership gets together in a little group and they say, okay, what are we going to give him? They don't, it's not like, is he guilty or is he not guilty? That judge, that poor little judge in the courtroom, he has nothing to do with this whole thing. He's a show, in the poor prosecutor, all these people, right? They're all actors in this thing. And I think it's kind of depressing when you think about it, that after 30 years of reform and opening and the government talking about rule of law, it's effectively the same exact procedure and done in the same way with the same outcomes and the same imagery and, the tall policeman and the whole thing, right? It's nuts. It's so I would say it tells you, people are always talking about, wow, China changes so fast, but there are some things on the political side, on the legal side, that just stay exactly the same. And that's what I think that told us. And that's why I guess that was the most striking thing for me.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience working as a journalist, apart from this trial, just more generally, your experience working as a journalist in a Chinese context, in particular as a foreigner working for a foreign publication. And I'm curious to hear about your sources, and obviously I know this is a bit of a sensitive topic and there are details you won't be able to go into, but how you meet these people, how you finesse them, and why they talk to you, what are they looking for?
They're finessing us most of the time, I think. Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you for the question. That's an obvious question, right? So why would some senior leader want to risk their career by going and having dinner with a foreign journalist, risk getting investigated for corruption, whatever? I guess there are two kinds of sources on that front. There is the one that is sent by the security services, basically, to feed you a line. And sometimes those lines can be very useful, and they can tell you so much about what the government wants you to know. There are pseudo-official, academics, people like that, and people within the system who are trying to send their own messages, right? So there are people who want to get their view out, family, friends of Bo Xilai who want their view of things to get some play. And they know that they can't go to a Chinese journalist because the Chinese journalist is never going to report it. They're never going to be allowed to, right? So in some ways, we have a responsibility, but we also have a huge advantage because the way that the censorship works in China is that there are many, many stories that Chinese media are not allowed to touch. And there are many journalist friends of mine who will call me up and say, let's go for a coffee. And you go meet them and they slide a piece of paper across the table and say, you should look at this story. Very interesting story. They've started looking into something. They think it's a really important public interest story, but they're not allowed to touch it. So they will pass it on to foreign journalists sometimes. Does happen. And then I guess my best sources have always been personal friends. So people you meet, and it's the great thing about Chinese culture, right? I think more than Western culture in a lot of ways, is that if you meet someone through your cousin or your wife or one of your family members, they don't see you as a foreign journalist. They see you as part of the clan, right? I mean, they see you, they accept you at the dinner table. And my best stories, and I have to say many stories I could never ever write, have come while sitting at a dinner table when suddenly someone at the table realized, it's a foreign journalist, don't say that, But they don't realize, if you're sitting there, my wife is Chinese, many of my friends are Chinese, most of the people I've gotten to know in the 10 years I've been there are Chinese. Some of them returnees from overseas who speak good English, some of them not. But those people see me first as a friend and someone they want to help their career along because that might help them later or because they just generally care. And so they will tell you things. I mean, it's astonishing. The flip side of there being such a control on information and there being so little credible information from official sources in China is that the back channels are just like wide and deep. I mean, it's incredible how many stories I've got from people who just felt that they thought that should get out. So, yeah, I mean, it's one of the hardest things about working in China is that when you first arrive, if you don't speak the language especially, and if you're sort of floundering, you go to a press conference and they tell you lies or nothing, you're really floundering for a long time. But once you're in the culture and you're kind of accepted and you've got these friends and contacts, you can just beat everyone. It's a great thing.
Do you believe Bo Xilai is plotting a coup?
Do I believe he was plotting a coup? I think probably when he went down to the 14th Army, he was thinking about it. When he knew that he was already done for, I think he probably would have considered it. When he knew he was already going down, then I think it was probably too late. But, yeah.
When Wang Lijun went to the U.S. consulate, he released some information to the U.S. government official. Do you get hold of those files?
No, I haven't seen those files. But I had good sources in the U.S. government. Let's just put it that.
He was planning for months. I mean, not military group, something that would allow him take over the Secretary General in a few years after the last party congress.
So I don't have any information or proof that was what he was that's what he was planning. But there is a lot of rumor around that him and Zhou Yongkang were working together. So once Bo Xilai was in this standing committee in the Chichong Way, that he would work to replace Xi Jinping. That is the rumor, and that's a lot of people have said that, and a lot of people assume that. And I think even Xi Jinping and some of the other leaders believe that, right? But I can't prove it. I don't have any documents or evidence.
Do you believe this crisis caused, because previously the Politburo Standing Committee has 9 members, and among those 1 members is the PLAC, the Legislative Affairs Committee. And it is because of this crisis that the seat of that power gets severely reduced, and that seat is no longer within the Standing Committee.
Yeah, definitely because of this crisis, the Zhengfa Weiyuanzhang, or whatever he's called, the head of the League Politics and Law Committee, is no longer in the Standing Committee of the Politburo. That, I think, is a direct result of the Bo Xilai scandal and Zhou Yongkang, but it's also a very popular move within the government and within wider society because Zhou Yongkang had built up so much personal power. He was number 9 in the hierarchy, but he was probably number 2 in power, even number 1, right? Because he controlled all of the security services. So there's it's clear that the current leadership wants to curtail the power of that apparatus. And you know, there have been hundreds of people removed from the Ministry of State Security in the last year or so. I mean, hundreds of people gone, and a big clean out in the police system. Many of the police heads have all been shifted around or retired, and so it's clear that the new leadership wants to get this under control. I think he'll serve at least 10 years, or at least 9 years now. He has to serve till after Xi Jinping steps down. That's my basic assumption. And then it depends on who comes next, right? It depends on whether the next person wants to rehabilitate him. By then he'll be 72, 73. It'll be harder for him to come back and you know, stage a kind of political revival. I mean, it's very, very difficult. Because of the unwritten rules. So I think he'll serve at least 10 years, and then because he's part of the nobility, basically, the aristocracy, I think they'll probably show leniency once he's no longer a political threat. As they have with many other leaders. I mean, if you look back, the other Politburo level people who've been detained, Chen Shitong in the 90s and Chen Liangyu in about 2005, both of them got out. Chen Shitong a little bit longer, about 8 years, but Chen Liangyu got out like 2 or 3 years ago, and he was sentenced to 18 years or 16 years or something. So once they figure you're neutralized and you make a promise you're not going to get involved with politics or anything else, then generally they let you out. So 10 years at least. I think maybe probably we have to wrap it up. Happy to chat with anyone. Okay. Happy to chat afterwards. I'm around at the school for some of tomorrow, and do you want the microphone? There you go. Right.
Yeah, a very warm thank you. I think we, almost all of us learned a lot, probably all of us. And it's nice to feel that some people know something about what's going on. Yes, yes, very tempted. Thank you very much. We'll give you something to remember the occasion.
Yeah, Mr. Anderlini, as a token of our appreciation, our college master will now present you with a special souvenir. Professor Merlis, please. May I now invite masters, honorable guests, and college fellows for photo taking with Mr. Anderlini, please.